In this video, we are going to discuss the status of women in the novel The Color Purple, written by Alice Walker. The Color Purple, the epistolary novel of 1982, written by Alice Walker, did a great job in documenting the oppressions and traumas of black women's society with a perfect example of Celie, an uneducated African American teenager. Society treated her as a second class citizen or as a second sex because she is black and a woman. In Celie's first letters to God, she details how her stepfather Alfonso has been sexually abusing her. Also, he instructed to not disclose it, like she must shut up to the abuse. And thus, Celie becomes pregnant twice, and each time her father, that is her stepfather, gives away the children. He sold them and told her that he killed them in a forest. Here, at a very early age, she was abused in her own house as her pa, Alfonso, considered Celie as a sexual object who can provide him pleasures. So, this is an example of the narrow view of majority of the manhood in this novel. They think women don't deserve to get higher education or not have the capacity to participate in any kind of knowledge production or in social functioning, as they only have the ability to satisfy men in their bed and to raise kids. Alfonso always tried to fill inferiority complexes in her by directly suggesting her as unattractive and ugly, like he is injecting the thought that she is useless and good for nothing in a very early age itself. Also, he pretends that he doesn't know who is the father of Celia's children, and he calls Celia as dirty, not fresh, and spoiled as she got early pregnancy. But the irony is, who made her pregnant is the one who judges her itself. When Mr. Dash asks Nettie's hand in marriage, Alfonso won't allow that. Instead, he offers on Celia as a hard worker. The reason behind Mr. Dash's marriage to Celia is very clear at the time of his proposal. He simply wanted a maid to take care of his kids and households, so he didn't wish for a companion or a partner in Celia. During the time of marriage proposal, Mr. Dash asked Alfonso whether Celie comes with a cow or not. Here Alfonso replied that the cow is hers as a dowry or wedding present. So the idea behind this conversation is clear in this novel that Celie didn't have any particular opinion or voice related to her marriage. It's happened more like selling a cow between Alfonso and Mr. Dash. When Celie entered Mr. Dash's house, the treatment by his kids were cruel. Later, he himself slapped her as she talked back to him. He never appreciated her. He behaved like her boss and taxmaster, not as a friend and confidant. He beats her for not having attractive physical appearances like Shagavari. Albert does beat Celie because he thinks she's a woman who is already known that her position is lower than man. Moreover, she is his wife. When Harpo asked him why he beat Celie, he simply replied that, "Cause she's my wife." So, this conversation, like his dialogue, she is my wife, so I have the full right to beat her, which shows his dominance over Celia's body, that is physically and also mentally. In their sexual life, also, Celia is treated like a second sex. He only focused on his pleasures and feelings, nothing less, nothing more. In a nutshell, Celia is expected to look after Mr. Dash's children, work in the fields, and submit to joyless sexual encounters with a man who treats her like an unpaid prostitute. When Mr. Dash's eldest son, Harpo, became a man, he was also unwilling to work, like his father, and argues that work is for women and not for men. So, through Harpo, Walker is trying to suggest that the attitude of treating women as a second sex behaviors gets cycled through generations over generation until women started to stand for themselves. Here, Harpo, like his father, believed men rules the roost and order women around. So he wanted his girlfriend Sophia to be pregnant and thus to marry, so that he can have a family of his own and to rule like Albert. But unlike many women of those time, Sophie is a strong, confident, and daring female character who is determined to assert her independence by rejecting traditional ideas about a woman's role in African American society. As a black American woman in the 1930s, she rejects completely the systematic oppression that engulfed the position of the black woman. In that system, blacks worked for whites who paid them very little. In addition, a black woman came under the rule of her husband. But here, Sophia fights back when Harpo tries to rule her. She wants a partnership relationship in their marriage, not a master servant relationship or dominant dominant agreement. When Sophie isn't under the control of Harpo, Mr. Dash and even Seeley suggested him to beat her. According to Mr. Dash, beating is the only way to get a woman to understand and to obey. But Sophie protested against such second class treatments and thus she became imprisoned. Shagabari is another major female character in the novel. She is the metaphor for self determination and self love. She is an unconventional and a blues singer. As she is leading independent life and having numerous men, patriarchal society hated her and referred her as nasty woman, loose woman, dirty, conceited, untrustworthy, etc. Her sexual frankness, free spiritedness, and independence triggered the conventional society which controls women in every aspect. Both Nettie and Mary Agnes were controlled at one part of their life. Alfonso and Mr. Dash tried to rape Nettie. When Mary wants to establish herself as a singer, Harpo cannot understand why she should wish to be independent when he provides everything in their marriage. And when she helps to get Sophie out of prison, her white uncle thinks that he has an absolute right to extract payment from her in the form of sex. Religion and culture also contributed in considering women as second sex. Because of traditional Olinga culture, Tashi's parents hesitated to allow her to study. This tribe regarded women as worthless assets, fit only for childbearing, and denied them any education. They endorsed the ritual of female genital mutilation, which literally marks girls as male possessions. Later in the novel, Tashi scarred her face and undergo female circumcision as parts of the Olingan cultural transition in order to be considered a real Olinga woman. So there are such rituals and customs which directly or indirectly subjugate women. In the case of religion, Celia was taught to be sacrifice her feelings, pleasures, and every earthly happiness and to obey her husband in order to attain redemption and salvation. She even not dared to call her husband's name as Albert until and unless she started valuing her worth. So, we can see Albert, Harpo, and Alfonso are some examples of a society which makes women to feel and live as second sex. They are not only physically violent but sexually and emotionally abusive, making the women with whom they live feel fearful, worthless, and inferior. But by the end of the novel, struggling women gains their freedom and essence for living through female solidarity and uplifting each other's, and thus they started to understand and value of their true potentials and started to consider themselves as equals. Thus, Alice Walker's Womanist novel upholds the need of female solidarity and the breaking of patriarchy.